ABA was a city that never slept, but not because of its beauty or its dreams. It stayed awake because of struggle. From dawn till dusk, generators hummed like a million restless bees. Market women shouted prices in hoarse voices, their words swallowed by the noise. Muddy water snaked through the busy roads, and the air was always thick, with heat, with sound, with a relentless, chaotic life. People didn't live here, they survived. In the middle of this restless city, in a cramped compound where 6 families shared a single bathroom and a cracked well, Olido was born. Her mother, Mama Nina, always said she came into the world quietly. No loud cry, no struggle. She just opened her eyes and stared at the midwife, as if she already understood that life would be hard. Her father, Okachukwu, was a mechanic at Cemetery Road. He was the kind of man who fixed cars with raw strength and a lot of prayer, because proper tools were a luxury he couldn't afford. Every evening, he returned home with grease-stained hands and tired bones, yet he always managed a smile for his children. Olido grew up with 4 siblings, all crammed under one leaking roof. When the rain fell, they would strategically place buckets under the holes, listening to the rhythmic drip, drip, drip that was the soundtrack of their nights. When the Harmattan season came, the cold wind bit through the thin walls, and they slept huddled together on worn mats, sharing body heat for warmth. But their real enemy wasn't the weather. It was poverty, a constant, grinding poverty that dictated every part of their lives. She attended a public school nearby, a building so old some windows had no frames, just the jagged memories of broken glass. Teachers came when they could. A single piece of chalk was precious. Exercise books were reused until the pages became as thin as onion skin. But Olido loved learning, especially English and literature. She devoured stories and dreamed of becoming a journalist, someone who could tell the stories that mattered, the stories of people like her. But in a place like ABA, dreams often died young. Sometimes, she was sent home for owing school fees. On those days, she didn't cry. She would simply walk to the market and help her mother sell audrey and pepper, her small hands learning the trade of survival. Other times, her school uniform was so torn that she had to stitch it at night, using fishing line her father brought home from a neighbor. But the thing that truly marked her childhood was hunger. This wasn't the simple hunger of skipping lunch or waiting for dinner. This was a deep, gnawing hunger that made her dizzy in class, a hunger that forced her to drink water just to fool her stomach into believing it had eaten. It was a constant companion, a shadow that followed her everywhere. Yet, despite it all, Olido remained beautiful, painfully beautiful. Her almond-shaped eyes, her rich brown skin, and her long, graceful legs turned heads, even when she was just a teenager walking through the dusty streets. People would often say, "This girl is too fine for this kind of suffering." But beauty didn't put food on the table. It didn't pay school fees or mend a leaking roof. Beauty, she was beginning to learn, was just another thing people wanted to consume. By the time she reached SS1, her role in the family had shifted. She was no longer just a student. She had become a second mother to her younger siblings. She cooked, fetched water from the compound's well, and washed clothes in a corner of the yard, humming quietly to herself. Her hands, once soft, grew rough from chores too heavy for a young girl. Her father's mechanic shop struggled. Some days, no customers came at all. Her mother's small market stall barely made enough for their daily food. Electricity was a rare luxury, so they studied by candlelight, their shadows dancing like giants on the peeling walls of their small room. Her siblings adored her, especially little Afani, who believed his big sister could fix anything, from a broken slipper to a broken heart. But Olido carried a sadness she never voiced, a quiet, creeping fear that this was it, that life would never, ever get better. When she entered her final year, SS3, the questions started coming. What next, Olido? Will you go to university? She would always smile politely, a practiced, empty smile. Inside, her heart would twist into a tight knot. University? It felt like a different universe. There was no money, no sponsor, no miracle was on the horizon. She wrote her final WAC exam using a borrowed calculator and a single pen that she guarded like a precious treasure. She passed. She passed with good grades, grades that should have been a ticket to a brighter future. But the celebration was short-lived. On the day she received her results, her father sat quietly on a low wooden stool outside their home. His face was drawn, and his eyes were filled with a weariness that went bone deep. He couldn't look at her directly as he spoke. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice cracking. "But, Ada M., my daughter, we don't have anything. University, I don't know how we will manage." Olido just nodded slowly and hugged him. She didn't cry. She had already cried all her tears in the privacy of her own heart. The dream was dead, and she was the one who had to bury it. A week after finishing school, she sat alone behind their house, watching the neighborhood kids chase a deflated football. The world around her was still moving. The weeks after Olido finished secondary school drifted by slowly, like harmattan smoke that refused to clear. Each day felt exactly the same. The same oppressive heat, the same gnawing hunger, the same suffocating uncertainty. She helped her mother at the market, her hands raw from washing bitter leaf, her fingers stained from arranging tomatoes, her voice cracking from shouting prices from dawn till dusk. But no matter how hard they worked, the money never stretched far enough. It didn't matter how early they woke or how late they stayed at their stall, poverty always won. The portions of food on their plates got smaller. Their hopes for the future grew smaller. And their dreams, once so vibrant, were shrinking into dust. One sweltering afternoon, while she sat at the back of the market, her fingers mechanically tying pepper into small nylon bags, two girls passed by. She recognized them. They were wearing matching bright red wigs, skin-tight jeans, and perfumes so strong the scent lingered in the air long after they were gone. She knew of them. They lived near Asa Road and were always seen getting into flashy cars. People called them Runs girls. Girls who lived on their beauty, not a salary. The girls stopped near a provision stall, their voices carrying on the humid air. One of them whispered, but loudly enough for Olido to hear. "Girl, last night was Maddo. One politician carried me go hotel for Maitama." Her friend gasped. "Chai, how much he give you?" The first girl laughed, a sound full of pride and triumph. 250K. See money. Their laughter echoed as they walked away. Olido heard everything. And in that moment, something deep inside her shifted. It wasn't envy. It wasn't jealousy. It was just a quiet, cold realization. For people like them, for people like me, beauty is our only door out. She tried to push the thought away, to bury it under the weight of her daily chores. But it lingered, a stubborn seed planted in the fertile ground of her desperation. The turning point came on a night when her father returned home carrying nothing. Not a single kobo from his mechanic shop. He just sat on the doorstep, his head bowed low, his hands trembling from exhaustion and defeat. Inside, her younger siblings were crying from hunger, their small whimpers a constant, heartbreaking rhythm. Her mother was in the kitchen, boiling water, pretending she was cooking something just so the children might fall asleep with the false hope of a meal. Olido stood in the corner of the room, watching this scene unfold with a pain so deep she felt it in her bones. She knew then, with a terrible clarity, that poverty had already taken everything from them. And when a person has nothing left to lose, they start to consider paths they once feared to even look at. It happened quietly, without any grand drama. One evening, she put on her only decent gown, a simple red dress she usually saved for church, and walked to a nearby bar, one that was popular among the city's businessmen. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know what she would do, or how she would even start, but she knew exactly why she was there. She sat alone at the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her small purse. Men looked at her. Some admired her youth and beauty. Some assessed her, their eyes calculating. And some saw her exactly for what she was becoming, an opportunity. A middle-aged man with a shiny gold wristwatch approached her. "You're too fine to be sitting alone," he said, his smile a little too wide. She forced a small smile back, her heart racing against her ribs like a trapped bird. They talked. He bought her a drink. He asked questions, and she answered with lies she created on the spot, weaving a story of a life that wasn't hers. Later, he leaned in and said 10 words that sealed her fate. "Let us go somewhere private. I'll take care of you." She hesitated for a moment. One small, fleeting moment where she almost stood up and ran home, back to the familiar misery. But then, she pictured her siblings' empty plates, heard their hungry cries, and she followed him. When she returned home late that night, she had $35 tucked into her purse. It was more money than her father made in weeks. Her mother, awake and worried, asked where she got it. Olido lied quickly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I helped a rich woman with some house chores. Her mother smiled, a tired, relieved smile, and thanked God for his blessings. That night, Olito cried silently into her pillow. She didn't cry because of shame. She didn't cry because of guilt. She cried because it worked. The money solved their problems instantly. Food returned to their table. The children's school fees were paid. The light, which had been cut off, came back on in the house. But the snowball had already started rolling down the hill, gathering speed and size. The next week, she went back to the bar. And the week after that. And the week after that. Soon, the men learned her name. Soon, they started calling her phone. Soon, she no longer needed to sit alone, waiting for attention. She became the center of attention. At first, she hated herself for what she was doing. The self-loathing was a constant companion. Later, she became numb, building a wall around her heart to survive the nights. But eventually, the numbness gave way to something else. Confidence. A hard, brittle confidence. She was too confident. Men adored her beauty, her curves, her voice, her charm. And she learned how to use every part of herself like a tool for survival. She mastered the art of the flirtatious smile, the lingering touch, the whispered promise. Each interaction was a transaction, each compliment a currency. She was no longer just Olito, the girl from the market. She was a creation, a persona built for one purpose: to get what she needed to keep her family afloat. But what starts as survival can easily curdle into something else. The constant influx of money, the attention, the power she felt holding these men in the palm of her hand. It was intoxicating. The lines began to blur. Was she doing this to feed her family, or was she doing it because she had become addicted to the lifestyle? The money that once bought food now bought expensive clothes, wigs, and the very perfumes she once smelled on those girls at the market. Survival had become an addiction. And Olito, the girl who just wanted to save her family, was now falling deeper and deeper into a world she never intended to join, a world that would demand a price far greater than she could ever imagine. And her destiny, a destiny intertwined with a future no one could predict, was now firmly set on its course. Years went by. Olito's savings grew, and her fame in the city spread. Her beauty sharpened, but something darker also grew inside her. Something she never expected. She could no longer stop. What began as a desperate act to save her family became a cycle she could not break. First, she needed the money. Then, she needed the attention. And then, worst of all, she needed the feeling. The feeling of being wanted, desired, valued. By now, a whispered statistic floated around like market gossip. 3 out of every 5 men in ABA either knew her name or had been with her. And she felt trapped, not by poverty anymore, but by the person she had become. Sometimes at night, after the noise of the city quieted, she sat alone and whispered to herself, "Is this my life forever?" She knew she needed to escape. She knew she needed a new beginning. She longed for something real: love, family, peace. But she didn't know how to climb out of the ditch she had fallen into. Not yet. But destiny was already moving, preparing a way, shaping a future she could not imagine. A future that would one day bring her to a city where nobody knew her past, to a man who would love her beyond reason, and to a child who would change her world forever. The addiction of the body. The first year slipped by quietly, like a shadow moving under dim light. Olito tried, at the beginning, to keep everything under control. She tried to limit how often she went out, to choose her clients carefully, to keep her dignity intact. But life in ABA had a way of pulling even the strongest people into its rhythm. It wasn't long before that rhythm pulled her in too. The transformation began with small changes. She started dressing differently: brighter clothes, tighter jeans, shoes she couldn't have afforded before. She began speaking with more confidence, her voice gradually losing the timid softness it once carried. People noticed. The women in the compound whispered when she passed. The men stared longer than they should. Her siblings admired her without understanding the price of her beauty. Inside her, something was shifting, slowly at first, then rapidly. At some point, she realized she no longer walked, she glided. She no longer hoped, she calculated. She no longer feared men, she commanded them. The girl who once cried silently on her thin mattress was disappearing. In her place, a new woman was rising, bold, sharp, and intoxicating. Her evenings were no longer spent fetching water or helping her mother cook. Instead, She found herself in loud clubs, dim hotels, private apartments, and bars where the lighting was always too dark and the perfume always too strong. Men treated her differently now, with hunger, with admiration, with desperation. They bought her gifts, they begged for her attention. They returned again and again as if she were their escape from the world. And slowly, subtly, she began to enjoy it. The attention, the praise, the power. At first, she told herself she didn't enjoy it. She told herself she was doing it for her family, for survival. But survival had long ended. Now, she did it because it filled the emptiness inside her. Within 2 years, Olido became one of the most recognized young women in the city, not publicly, but in whispers, in phone contacts, in late-night conversations between men. Her name traveled through lounges, hotels, and offices. She could buy whatever she wanted. She could send money home whenever she chose. Her siblings' fees were always paid on time. Her parents began to smile more often, unaware of the sacrifices behind each full plate of food. But money was no longer what drove her. She realized this one night when a man, one of her richest clients, placed a thick envelope of naira on the table, enough money to buy a plot of land. Before, she would have been excited. That night, she barely looked at it. Her mind was on something else. She wanted to be touched. She wanted to feel wanted. She wanted to disappear into sensation, into escape, into the only thing that made her forget her past and silence her thoughts. The addiction had taken root, not to money, not to luxury, but to the act itself, a reputation she never asked for. It wasn't long before her fame became too loud to ignore. Men talked, men bragged, men lied. Stories spread like wildfire, some true, some false, some exaggerated beyond reason. Her name became a secret password men used among themselves. She's good. She's better than good. She's unforgettable. Some men even traveled from other towns just to find her. At first, the attention made her feel powerful. Later, it made her feel trapped. She couldn't walk freely in certain areas anymore. She couldn't sit in a bar without someone recognizing her. She couldn't pretend to be an ordinary girl. The city had given her money, but it had taken her anonymity. As Olido stood at this crossroads, a new figure was about to enter her life. A man from a powerful family, whose path was destined to cross hers in the most unexpected way. He wasn't like the others. He saw something in her that no one else did, something beyond her reputation, something worth saving. But his family's influence was a double-edged sword, one that could either lift her up or destroy her completely. Their meeting would set off a chain of events that would force Olido to confront her deepest fears and make a choice that would define her future. Would this new connection be her salvation, or would it pull her deeper into the world she so desperately wanted to escape? The answer lay just around the corner, waiting in the heart of ABA's bustling nightlife. ABA knew her too well. There were nights she cried after everything was over. Nights she stared at the ceiling, exhausted and hollow, wondering what she had become. But by morning, the cycle always began again. She tried to stop once. She told herself, just for 2 weeks. For 14 days, she stayed home, avoided calls, and refused every single invitation. She locked her door and drew her curtains, hoping to starve the beast inside. By the end of the second week, she thought she was losing her mind. Sleep wouldn't come. Her body felt restless, a constant, jittery energy thrumming under her skin. Her mind was a chaotic storm of loud, racing thoughts. Her skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. In a moment of desperation, without even realizing what she was doing, her hand reached for her phone. She scrolled through the messages and accepted the next invitation. The moment she stepped back into that familiar world, a strange calm washed over her. Her frantic body settled, her racing mind grew quiet, and her heartbeat, which had been hammering against her ribs, returned to its normal rhythm. It was in that moment she understood a terrifying truth. She wasn't just doing it. She needed it. It was a craving that didn't listen to logic, morality, or shame. It ran deeper than flesh. It had burrowed its way into her soul, the wounded part she had no idea how to heal. One night, after a long, draining evening, she found herself standing before the mirror in a cheap hotel bathroom. The single fluorescent light above her head flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the tiled room. She stared hard at her reflection, searching for the girl she used to be. The bright-eyed, hopeful girl who had first arrived in ABA with dreams bigger than the city itself. But she couldn't find her. The woman staring back had different eyes, sharper, darker, carrying stories no one would ever fully understand. Her body was beautiful, desirable, the very thing that paid her bills, but it was tired. A deep, soul-crushing tired that no amount of sleep could ever cure. For the first time in years, she spoke aloud to herself, her voice a raw whisper in the sterile silence of the bathroom. Olito, what have you become? The silence that answered her was heavy, suffocating. She wanted a different life, a real life. A life with morning coffee and quiet evenings, a life filled with genuine laughter, not the practiced kind she put on for strangers. But she didn't know how to start again. Every path she imagined in front of her seemed stained and blocked by the choices she had already made. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a small, defiant voice whispered back, "You can still change. You can still escape." She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't live like this forever. She didn't realize it then, but destiny was already setting a new path for her, opening a door that would lead her far from ABA, far from her past, and straight into the arms of a man who would change everything. For better and for worse. Time has a strange way of sneaking up on you. For years, Olido lived her life in a dizzying whirlwind. Nights blurred together into a haze of dim lights and strange beds. Days passed like fleeting shadows, and her phone never stopped vibrating with calls and messages from men who wanted her company. She was always moving, always earning, always performing. Her life was a constant hustle, a performance that never ended. But slowly, quietly, something else was happening in the background. She was aging. It wasn't in a harsh or dramatic way. Her beauty was still sharp enough to turn heads and command attention in any room she entered. But she could feel the subtle changes, the small shifts that no one else could see. She felt it in the mornings when her body felt heavier, the aches lingering a little longer. She felt it in the nights when her mind felt emptier, the hollowness after every encounter growing wider and deeper. She was approaching 30, but the life she had lived for nearly a decade had made her soul feel ancient. The mirror started to show a weariness that makeup couldn't quite hide, a shadow in her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many forced smiles. The vibrant energy that once defined her was being replaced by a fragile, brittle exhaustion. The first real wake-up call came from an unexpected place. It began with a casual comment from a younger girl in her neighborhood. The girl, barely out of her teens, had approached her with a playful smile. "Auntie Olido, please borrow me your face powder," she'd said, her eyes bright with admiration. "But your own is even finer self. If I reach your age and still fine like you, I go thank God." Oh. Olido froze. Your age. The words hit her like a physical blow. It was the first time anyone had so bluntly reminded her that she wasn't 21 anymore. She wasn't the new girl in town. She was Auntie Olido, a full-grown woman who had spent nearly a decade trapped in a cycle she never planned for, a life she had fallen into and couldn't climb out of. The girl's innocent comment had held up a mirror she had been avoiding for years. That one night, she met a client, a young man, barely older than 22. He was excited, nervous, and so talkative, the kind of boy who giggled too much. When he finally realized who she was, his eyes widened with disbelief. He said, so now you be the Olido? I hear say you don day this game since before I even enter university." He laughed, like it was some harmless joke. But for Olido, those words pierced her chest like a cold, sharp knife. Since before he entered university? She forced a polite smile, but inside, she felt something crack, something shatter. Later that night, when she finally returned home, she locked the door behind her and just collapsed onto her bed. Since before he entered university, she whispered it to herself. And then again, and again. Each repetition felt heavier than the last, sinking into her bones, weighing down her spirit. Once she started noticing her age, she couldn't stop. It was everywhere. She began avoiding mirrors, afraid of the strangers staring back at her. She stopped wearing certain clothes, worried they made her look desperate, like she was trying too hard to hold on to something that was already gone. She even stopped smiling as often, because somehow, the lines around her eyes made her feel older. And worst of all, the men, they began treating her differently. Now, some were still obsessed with her, drawn to her like moths to a flame. But many of the new ones were younger, fresh, playful, careless. They saw her as an experienced woman, a veteran, not the innocent beauty she once was. The compliments changed, too. They became tainted with a backhanded pity. You're still very fine for your age. Auntie, you still get bodio. I no believe say you don't reach late 20s. Still, that word, still, it felt like a slap across the face each time she heard it. Still beautiful, still desirable, still relevant. As if her beauty had an expiration date stamped on it. As if desire had a timeline. As if she was running out of time, and the clock was ticking louder and louder with each passing day. One night, she returned from seeing a client. The money was good. The night was technically successful, but as she walked home, she felt an overwhelming emptiness wrapping itself around her like cold harmattan air. She walked into her small apartment and dropped the wad of cash on the table without even counting it. She took off her shoes slowly, as if each simple movement carried a memory she didn't want to revisit. She sat on the edge of her bed, her gaze fixed on her phone. Dozens of missed calls. Men asking when she was free. Men asking for pictures. Men asking for just one more night. With a surge of frustration, she threw the phone onto the bed. And for the first time in years, she cried. Not the silent tears she was used to, not the controlled sobs she had perfected. This was a painful, raw cry that erupted from a place deep within her soul. She cried for the girl she used to be, the one with dreams that had nothing to do with men or money. She cried for the woman she had become, a product of circumstance and survival. And she cried for a future she feared she would never have. What scared her most wasn't getting older. It was the sudden, crushing realization that she had no life beyond the nightlife. No husband, no children, no home to truly call her own. No identity outside of Olido, the legend of the ABA nightlife. There was just an empty apartment and a body that no longer felt like it belonged to her. The next morning, she forced herself to look in the mirror. To really, truly look. And for the first time, she saw the whole truth. She saw the beauty. Yes, it was still there. But she also saw the scars, the invisible ones that no one else could see. She saw a woman who had survived things most people only whispered about in hushed tones. But beneath the survivor, she saw something else: loneliness, pain, deep, gut-wrenching regret, and a profound yearning for something real. She saw visions of wedding rings, not just the cheap ones men took off before they saw her. She heard the sound of children's laughter, a sound that had never echoed in her own home. She imagined a husband's touch filled with love, not just lust. She swallowed hard, pressing a hand against her chest as if to hold herself together. I want a family, she whispered to her reflection. I want a different life. The admission was terrifying, because wanting a new life meant walking away from the only world she had ever known, the only life that had ever paid her bills. But she had saved money. She had strength she didn't even know she possessed. And hidden beneath the layers of mistakes and compromises, she had courage. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. A new dream began to form in her mind. It was shaky, fragile, but it was real. A dream of escape, of reinvention, of finding a love that wasn't transactional. A dream of starting over in a place where her past could not follow her, where no one knew her name or her story. And so, silently, without telling a single soul, she made a decision. A decision that would uproot her entire existence, carry her to a new city, and set in motion a destiny far beyond her wildest imagination. A decision that would eventually lead her to a man named Chuka, to a marriage she never expected, and to the birth of a child who would change everything. The decision to leave ABA didn't land softly. It struck Olido like a storm, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. After that night, she cried herself to sleep. Something awakened inside her. It was a quiet strength, a stubborn determination, a whisper that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Start again. Leave before this place buries you. For days, she moved like a woman possessed by a vision she couldn't explain, not even to herself. She just knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that her time in ABA had expired. This chapter of her life was over, and if she didn't turn the page herself, she would be trapped in it forever. That evening, walking into the hotel lobby where she usually met clients, something was different. The receptionist looked at her, but not with the usual mix of admiration or lust. This time, it was recognition and a hint of pity. Pity. That was it. That was the moment she knew she'd stayed too long in this life. Later that night, after the man she was with had fallen asleep, she slipped out of the room. She didn't go home. Instead, she wandered the quiet streets of ABA, the hum of generators and the distant chatter from beer parlors filling the air. She walked past the broken streetlights, the familiar corner kiosks, the old shops that once felt like home. But tonight, everything looked different. Smaller, narrower, too tight for the woman she so desperately wanted to become. She stopped in front of a dark store window and saw her reflection. A beautiful woman, shrouded in the dim light of the night, her eyes holding secrets she didn't want anyone to read. In that reflection, she didn't see the young girl who once dreamed of going to university. She saw a woman who was suffocating, a woman who needed freedom more than she needed air. That was the final straw. The next morning, she woke up early and started to pack. Not her clothes, those were easy to leave behind. Not her shoes, she barely cared for them anymore. She packed hope, piece by fragile piece. She gathered the envelope thick with her savings, her phone, and a few dresses she considered decent enough for a new life. And then, her WAC result. She didn't know why, but she tucked it into her bag anyway. It felt like a relic from a different person, a different time. Before leaving, she cleaned her small room meticulously. This wasn't about sentiment. It was about erasing herself. She wanted to leave no trace, no scent, no memory. Nothing that could tie her to this city, to this life. Her mother watched her, her tired eyes clouded with concern. Olido, where are you going with all these bags? Olido forced a smile that felt like it was cracking her face. I got a job offer. A good one. In Abuja. Her mother's eyes widened, filling with a hope that stabbed Olido's chest like a sharp blade. Abuja? My daughter, God has finally answered our prayers. Prayers. Olido swallowed the lump in her throat. Her mother had been praying for a miracle for years. But Olido knew she wasn't leaving as a miracle. She was running away from herself. She pulled her mother into a tight hug, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of palm oil and kitchen smoke. Her mother held her just like she did when Olido was a little girl, before life had bent her spirit so sharply. I'm proud of you, her mother whispered, and those 4 words nearly shattered her resolve. She didn't tell her father she was leaving. He was at his workshop, bent over an engine as always, sweating under the harsh sun. She couldn't bear to see him smile at her, filled with a pride she felt she didn't deserve. She just left a small envelope of money on the table, her last gift to the home that had raised her. She didn't say goodbye to her siblings either. Their tears would have been the chains she couldn't break. She just slipped away. Some escapes demand noise and drama. Some require incredible courage. Hers required silence. She walked to the bus park, the straps of her bags digging into her shoulders, the weight of her past tugging at her heels like unseen chains. But then she saw it. The bus destined for Abuja. It was tall and glossy, a world away from the rusty, battered buses she was used to. And in that moment, her heart clenched with a powerful mix of fear and exhilarating excitement. This is it, she whispered to herself. This is the beginning. The journey north took hours. Long, winding hours filled with dust, the constant chatter of fellow passengers, and the brief stops where people rushed out to buy roasted corn or suya. But Olido barely noticed. Her mind was a battlefield of what-ifs. What if Abuja was worse? What if she couldn't outrun her past? What if she'd made a terrible mistake leaving everything she knew? What if she failed? But then, the images flooded back. The hotel receptionist's look of pity, the hushed, ugly whispers she'd overhear from men, the little girl who'd called her auntie with wide-eyed surprise, the suffocating realization that ABA was squeezing the very life out of her. No, there was nothing left for her in that city. Staying wasn't an option. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the bus window and watched the world transform. The familiar crowded streets of ABA gave way to small villages, then sprawling farmlands, rolling hills, and other, unfamiliar cities. With every mile that passed, she felt a subtle shift inside her. By the time the bus finally rolled into Abuja, her heart felt different, lighter. ABA was behind her. A new life was ahead. Abuja was everything ABA was not. It was like stepping onto another planet. The roads were clean and wide. The streetlights actually worked. The houses were grand, protected by high fences and security gates. The people, they walked with a confidence she'd never seen, dressed professionally, and spoke in softer tones. She took a deep breath, and instead of exhaust fumes and dust, she smelled fresh, clean air. For the first time in years, she felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. She felt safe. She checked into a small, clean hotel, took a long shower that felt like it washed away more than just the grime of the journey, and slept. She slept deeply, a dreamless, restorative sleep she hadn't experienced in months. The next day, she began her search. She wasn't just looking for an apartment. She was searching for a new beginning. A place where nobody knew her face, where no one could connect her to the whispers of a past she was desperate to shed. A place that would force her to become someone better, someone new. After days of searching, she found it. A luxurious estate with pristine white houses, perfectly trimmed flowers lining the clean streets, and an air of quiet sophistication. The rent was high, high enough to make her breath catch in her throat. But she paid it without flinching. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't just renting an apartment. She was buying a new identity. In Abuja, Olido changed everything. Her wardrobe, her hairstyle, her vocabulary, even her daily routines. She bought elegant dresses, learned to speak calmly and softly. She made a conscious effort to listen more than she talked, observing, absorbing, and understanding her new environment before making her move. Slowly, carefully, she started making friends. But not just any friends, the right kind of friends. These were women who worked in banks, women who owned chic boutiques, women who spent their weekends at brunch spots and yoga classes. To them, she was a quiet, beautiful, and polite newcomer. No one suspected her past. No one whispered her name in secret. She had finally, completely, shed her old skin. Olido wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time, she was truly living. And in this new life, a life that was clean, bright, and brimming with possibility, a man was waiting. A man she hadn't met yet. A man who would love her beyond all reason, whose very presence was destined to rewrite her future. A man named Chuka. The first few months in Abuja felt like stepping into a dream Olido didn't think she was allowed to have. The quiet mornings, the clean, tree-lined streets of the estate, the polite nods from neighbors. It all felt so unreal, almost fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it all. But she was determined not to break this new version of herself. She had one simple rule: become someone new and never, ever look back. Every morning, she woke early, brewed a cup of tea, and sat on her small balcony, watching the estate slowly wake up. She cherished the silence, the absence of judgment, the sense of possibility that hung in the air like a delicate perfume. Her neighbors were a world away from the ones she grew up with. These were women who worked in banks, law firms, and bustling tech offices. They wore sharp blazers, carried sleek laptops, and their conversations revolved around traffic and meetings, not about the constant struggle for water or the disruptive noise of generators. One neighbor, Amaka, stood out immediately. She was bold, smart, and had a warmth that could fill any room. It was Amaka who made the first move. "Hi, neighbor. My name is Amaka. You must be new here," she said one morning, her smile genuine and inviting. Olido, a bit nervous, smoothed down her dress. "Yes, I just moved in." Amaka grinned, her eyes sparkling. "Good. You're coming with me for brunch this weekend." No arguments. That was the beginning of a friendship Olido didn't even know she needed so desperately. Through Amaka, she met other women, all confident, modern, and ambitious. They welcomed her into their circle without asking prying questions about her past, without a hint of suspicion. For the first time in years, Olido wasn't the subject of hushed whispers. She was just a woman, a friend, a normal person. Then came the invitation that changed everything. One sunny afternoon, her phone rang. It was Amaka. "Babe, I'm at home. Come and keep me company, Jer. My brother is around too, but just ignore him. He's always forming serious." Olido didn't think much of it. She dressed casually in a simple sundress, tied her hair up, and walked the short distance to Amaka's house, completely unaware that destiny had already walked ahead of her. Amaka's house was larger than she had expected, with cream-colored walls, polished tiles, and neatly trimmed plants lining the walkway. A housekeeper welcomed her in, and she found Amaka curled up on a large couch, watching a movie. "Look at you. Amaka teased, her voice full of laughter. Fine girl. Abuja is already polishing you. They were still laughing together when a figure emerged from the hallway and walked into the living room. A man. He was tall, well-built, with rich brown skin and gentle eyes. A calm, steady presence seemed to fill the room before he even spoke a word. His voice, when it came, was deep and smooth. Amaka, where did you keep my? He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes landed on her. Their gazes met, and in that single, suspended moment, something shifted. The air in the room, her own heartbeat, time itself. Olido felt it instantly, a warm, quiet pull in her chest, a sensation entirely new, something she had never experienced, not even in her wildest, most reckless years. Amaka, noticing the sudden silence, grinned mischievously. Oh, there you are. Chuka, this is my new friend and neighbor, Olido. Olido, this is my brother, Chuka. Chuka's eyes never left hers as he gave a slight, respectful nod. It's a pleasure to meet you, Olido. The way he said her name was different. It sounded like music, like a promise. Olido found her voice, a little breathless. It's nice to meet you too. The polite words felt entirely inadequate for the current running between them. She sat down, trying to regain her composure, but she was acutely aware of him. He didn't join them on the couch immediately. Instead, he lingered by the doorway, leaning against the frame, an easy confidence in his posture. He and Amaka exchanged a few words about a family matter, but Olido felt his attention was still on her. She could feel his gaze, not in a prying or uncomfortable way, but with a quiet, intense curiosity. Amaka, ever the lively host, tried to pull him into their conversation. Chuka, stop standing there like a statue and come and sit down. Olido doesn't bite. He smiled, a slow, captivating smile that lit up his features. I'm not so sure about that, he replied, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Olido. She looks like she might have a few secrets. The comment, meant as a light-hearted joke, sent a tiny jolt of panic through Olido. But she met his gaze, holding it steady, and offered a small, mysterious smile of her own. Maybe I do, she said, her voice soft but firm. His smile widened. He was intrigued, not suspicious. This was a game, a dance, and for the first time, she felt equipped to play. He finally sat in an armchair opposite her, and the conversation flowed. He asked her about her move to Abuja, what she did for a living. She had set up a small online business curating gift boxes, a venture that gave her both freedom and a respectable answer. He listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his focus entirely on her. He wasn't just hearing her words. He was truly listening. With every passing minute, the initial pull she felt deepened into something more tangible. It was in the way he laughed, a low, warm sound. Olido, meet my elder brother, Chuka. Chuka, meet my friend, Olido. He stepped forward, offering his hand for a shake. His palm was warm, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle. And his smile, it was soft, genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. Nice to meet you, he said, his voice calm and steady. Olido swallowed, trying to compose herself, to steady the sudden flutter in her chest. And you too, she managed to reply, her own voice feeling a little breathless. She'd met countless men in her life. Men who were richer, more powerful, conventionally more handsome, or overwhelmingly charming. But none of them had ever given her this strange, unsettling feeling. None of them had ever stared at her like this. It wasn't a look of appraisal, not the kind that sized her up, that saw only a pretty face, a nice figure, a fleeting moment of interest. Chuka looked at her like she was a real person, a whole person, with thoughts and feelings beyond the surface. It was unnerving. He didn't talk too much during the rest of the visit. He wasn't one of those men who tried too hard, who filled every silence with boasts or forced jokes to impress a woman. He simply joined them in the living room, a quiet but solid presence. He listened intently to the conversation between Olido and his sister, Amaka. He didn't just hear the words, he seemed to absorb them. When he did speak, it was to ask Olido thoughtful questions about her work, her interests, things that showed he was actually paying attention. He laughed softly at Amaka's jokes, a warm, rumbling sound that felt like home. Everything about him was calm, steady, safe, and that feeling of safety, ironically, terrified her. Olido wasn't used to men like him. The men in her world were often loud, demanding, their intentions clear and transactional. She knew how to navigate that landscape. But this was different. He was patient, respectful, warm without a hint of flirtation. He wasn't trying to win her over. He was simply getting to know her. With every gentle glance he sent her way, she felt a tightly wounded part of herself begin to soften, to unwind just a little. It was a sensation she hadn't experienced in so long. She had almost forgotten it was possible. Later, when it was time for her to leave, he stood up and walked her to the door. The hallway felt smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space. "Let me take your number," he said, his tone casual, almost an afterthought. "It will be good to know more friends in the estate." His words were light, but the moment felt heavy, significant. It felt like he was asking for more than just a phone number. He was asking for a way into her life, a connection. She hesitated, just for a second. 1,000 reasons to say no flashed through her mind. All the old walls she'd built around her heart screaming at her to retreat. But then she looked at his open, honest face, and she typed her number into his phone. "Thank you for coming," he said, that soft smile returning. Olido just nodded, unable to find her voice. Her heart was fluttering, a wild, chaotic dance in her chest she hadn't felt in years. As she walked away, a strange mix of emotions washed over her. That night, sleep was impossible. Her mind was a movie screen, replaying every detail of their meeting on a loop. His deep, steady voice, the warmth of his hand, the way his smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, the respectful way he carried himself, like a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it. She wasn't used to such men. She wasn't used to gentleness. She wasn't used to sincerity. Her life had been a masterclass in survival, not a fairy tale of romance. She had built her world on pragmatism and caution, never learning what real, unselfish affection felt like. So why did Chuka's presence, this brief encounter, feel like wrapping herself in a warm blanket on a cold night? Why did it feel so right? Just as she was drifting into a restless doze, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a message. It was from Chuka. "Hope you got home safely. It was nice meeting you today." Simple, direct, considerate. She stared at the message for a long time, the words seeming to glow in the dark room. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed back a reply. "I did. Thank you. Nice meeting you too." She placed the phone on her chest, right over her heart, and closed her eyes. For the first time in a very, very long time, she felt something she didn't fully understand, a cocktail of unfamiliar emotions. There was hope, a fragile, flickering flame. There was fear, a cold knot in her stomach. And there was a deep, quiet longing, a possibility of love. She had no idea, lying there in the dark, that this gentle, unassuming beginning would grow into a love so deep, so powerful, it would shake the very foundations of her life. She couldn't know it would lead her into a future filled with joy. She never thought she deserved secrets that could tear them apart, heartbreak that would test her strength, and ultimately a child unlike any other. Chuka didn't call the next day, nor the day after. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that tiny, 2-day silence bothered Olido in a way that shocked her. She was a grown woman, independent and self-sufficient. She didn't wait by the phone for any man. Yet, she found herself constantly checking her screen, her heart leaping at every random notification, only to feel a pang of disappointment when it wasn't him. The logical part of her brain was in overdrive. What was she even expecting? They had just met. They barely knew each other. He had simply been polite, warm, and thoughtful. That's what decent people do. Nothing more. Still, his absence felt louder than his presence had. The quiet evening invitation tugged at something deep within her chest. She hesitated, but only for a moment, then answered softly, "Yes, I'd like that." His reply was simple. "Good. I'll send the address." As if she didn't already know exactly where he lived. After ending the call, she placed the phone on her chest, letting out a long, shaky breath. Something new was beginning. Something subtle, gentle, and dangerously sweet. She knew she wasn't ready for it, but at the same time, she had no desire to stop it. Chuka's home was one of the grandest in the estate, but it wasn't loud or flashy. It was the kind of house that whispered wealth instead of shouting it, exuding an understated elegance. When she arrived, a housekeeper greeted her at the door with a polite smile. "Madam Olido, please come in." The word madam felt foreign. She wasn't used to that level of respect. As she stepped into the living room, She had to pause and take it all in. It was beautiful. Pearl-white walls stood in perfect contrast to the dark wooden floors. The furniture was simple yet tasteful, and a large, dynamic painting of a galloping horse hung above a console table. The entire space felt like it was built by a calm, disciplined man. Moments later, Chuka walked in from a hallway. He was dressed in black trousers and a soft gray shirt, looking relaxed and completely at ease in his natural seriousness. "You're here," he said, his voice warm. "I'm glad." There was no tension in his tone, no pretense. Just a calm sincerity that scared her more than any of the wealthy men from her past ever had. Dinner was simple but elegant: grilled fish, mashed yams, and a vegetable stir-fry. They ate slowly, conversation flowing between them as if they were old friends. He was curious about her move to Abuja, her dreams, and her interests. She, in turn, asked about his work, his passions, and his horses. They were different in almost every way imaginable, yet each moment felt strangely natural. There was no forced flirting, no predatory hunger in his eyes, no hidden motives. There was just peace, a feeling she never realized she had been craving so deeply. After they finished eating, he stood up with a small, knowing smile. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her through the back of the house, where a large, beautifully designed stable stretched across the compound. As they stepped inside, the earthy scent of hay and polished wood filled her lungs, a comforting and grounding aroma. She stopped in her tracks, completely stunned. Before her stood 3 magnificent horses, tall, majestic, and perfectly groomed. They looked like creatures carved from pure strength and grace. A gasp escaped her before she could stop it. You really have horses?" "Yes," he replied, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I've always loved them. They're calming, loyal, honest." She found herself drawn closer to one of them, a handsome brown stallion with dark, intelligent eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You can touch him," Chuka said gently. "He's gentle." Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers making contact with the stallion's neck. It felt warm, smooth, and incredibly strong. In that touch, she felt something strange, a quiet connection, a sense of comfort she couldn't quite explain. Chuka watched her, his eyes holding an unreadable expression, a mix of admiration, warmth, and perhaps something deeper. "Do you want to ride?" he asked, his question sending a jolt through her. Her heart thudded in her chest. "I've never." "I'll be beside you," he promised. Those 4 simple words were all it took to dissolve her fear. Moments later, she found herself seated on the horse, her own heartbeat seeming to sync with the steady rhythm of the animal's breathing. Chuka stood right beside her, one hand holding the reins steady, the other resting on her back, a warm, grounding presence. "You're doing great," he said softly, his voice a low murmur beside her ear. His voice, his touch, the gentle sway of the horse beneath her, it all blended together into a single, perfect moment that she knew she would never want to forget. After the ride, they sat on a bench near the stables, the cool evening breeze brushing against their skin. The air was filled with the soft sounds of the night and the occasional nicker from the horses. They didn't need to fill the silence with chatter. A comfortable quiet settled between them, a testament to the slow, natural bond that was forming. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was just happening, like a sunrise. For the first time in a very long time, Olito felt a flicker of hope. This man, this place, this feeling, it was different. It was real. And as she sat there beside him, under the vast, starry sky, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a story she was finally ready to be a part of. The night felt heavy with unspoken things. "You're easy to talk to," Chuka said, staring straight ahead. Olito's heart tightened. "You too." He turned to her, his eyes gentle and sincere. "I don't know why, but I feel comfortable with you. Like I've known you longer than just a few days." She swallowed, the words catching in her throat. "I feel that too." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, filled with a quiet understanding. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't lean in closer. He didn't rush anything. And that simple respect, that patient stillness, made her chest ache in a sweet, painful way. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, a feeling that whispered something dangerous. This man could break down the walls you've spent a lifetime building. This man could love you in a way that terrifies you. When he drove her home that night, The air in the car was thick with unspoken emotions. Before she stepped out, he spoke again, his voice gentle. Olido, can I see you again? Her breath caught. Yes. Soon, he pressed softly. Yes, she whispered again. A small, sincere smile reached his eyes. Good night. Good night, Chuka. As she stepped out of the car, she felt weightless, as if her feet weren't quite touching the ground. That night, she lay awake for hours, staring at her ceiling, consumed by a feeling she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. It was a soft, warm, slow-burning kind of affection. A possibility. A beginning. She was torn, not knowing whether to hold on to this fragile new feeling or run from it as fast as she could. She didn't know that Chuka would soon fall deeply, dangerously, in love with her. She didn't know her past would eventually resurface, threatening to destroy everything they were building. She didn't know that a future child would reshape both their destinies in ways neither of them could ever imagine. All she knew was that tonight felt like the first page of a new story. A love story. A painful story. A destiny she could not escape. The days following that first dinner at Chuka's house passed like soft waves. Gentle, warm, and steady. There was no rush, no loud declarations. Everything between them unfolded with a peaceful rhythm that scared Olido more than she wanted to admit. Chuka was unlike any man she had ever known. He didn't pressure her. He didn't chase her with an obvious hunger or lust. He didn't speak with that aggressive edge she had once learned to navigate for her own survival. Instead, he simply reached out. Slowly, thoughtfully, consistently. And with each call, each visit, each gentle question, he was tugging at a part of her heart she thought was long dead and buried. His romance was one of quiet gestures, not dramatic displays. He was intentional. He'd send simple messages that meant the world to her. Have you eaten today? Are you resting well? I passed by your street. Hope your day is going smoothly. They were simple words, but they warmed her in a way she wasn't used to, like a blanket on a cold night. Some evenings, he'd stop by her apartment after work, smelling faintly of engine oil and office air conditioning, always carrying takeout. He'd noticed she only cooked when she was overwhelmed, a small detail that showed he was truly paying attention. And whenever he visited, he didn't walk in like a conqueror, claiming new territory. He entered like a friend, a man who genuinely cared. He would sit on her sofa, loosen his tie, and talk to her about his day. The difficult clients he had to manage, the horses he was training, the projects he was juggling at his company. But more importantly, he listened to her. He really listened. Even when she spoke about the most mundane things, the garden in front of her house, a new neighbor who played their music too loud, the random thoughts that drifted through her mind. He listened as if she was sharing the most important secrets in the world. No man had ever made her feel like her voice mattered. But the closer he got emotionally, the deeper her fear grew. At night, when the estate fell into a deep silence, Olido would lie awake, staring at her ceiling, her mind replaying the years she had tried so hard to forget. The rooms she had visited, the men she had entertained, the time she had surrendered her body just to survive. The whispers, the shame, the dark secret she carried like a slow-acting poison inside her. And she would think to herself, over and over, if he ever finds out, if he ever learns who I really am, everything will end. The fear was a physical thing, choking her, suffocating the fragile happiness she felt. Even this simple joy scared her, because it was a happiness she believed she had no right to hold on to. This slow-burning affection felt like a cruel joke. Every kind word from Chuka was a reminder of her own unworthiness. Every gentle touch felt like a lie she was letting him believe. She was an imposter in this life, in this relationship, and it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. The more he loved her, the more she felt like a fraud. She was caught in a painful trap. The one thing she was beginning to crave more than anything was the very thing she felt destined to destroy. His love was a light, but it only made the shadows of her past seem darker and more menacing. How long could she keep up this act? How long before the man who saw her as pure and good discovered the truth? Deep down, Olido believed a simple, terrible thing. She didn't deserve a man like Chuka. Not with her past. Not with the scars she carried, both visible and invisible. Not with the name she had buried beneath a new accent and polished clothes. A name that echoed with a life she desperately wanted to forget. She was an imposter in this beautiful, clean world, and any day now, someone would see right through her. The first kiss happened on a cool evening, the kind where the world seems to hold its breath. They were sitting on a bench near the stable after a short horse ride. The sky was a masterpiece of orange and purple, and a soft evening breeze brushed against their skin. They had been talking about nothing and everything: life, future plans, dreams. It was easy with him, too easy. Almost shyly, she mentioned, "I've always wanted to learn how to swim." It was a small, silly dream, but she felt safe enough to share it. He turned to her, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Then I'll teach you." She laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. "You? You can swim?" He raised an eyebrow, a playful challenge in his expression. "I can. I'm a whole athlete. Don't underrate me." She laughed again, and this time it was even freer, more genuine. It was a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years, a relic of a girl she thought was long gone. As the sound faded, she noticed Chuka was staring at her. Really staring. His eyes had softened in a way that made her heart do a little flutter, a nervous, hopeful dance. "You look different when you laugh," he said quietly, his voice low and serious. She swallowed hard, the laughter caught in her throat. "Different good or different bad?" "Beautiful," he whispered. The word fell between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples that shook her to her core. He shifted just a little closer, and the space between them crackled with unspoken energy. She felt her heartbeat stutter, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Olido," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, so soft she almost thought she'd imagined it. "I like you. I don't know when it started, but I like you genuinely." Her breath caught. Her chest tightened with a feeling that was equal parts terrifying and wonderful. She could only whisper his name in return. "Chuka." He didn't pressure her. He didn't pull her close or rush the moment. He simply raised his hand and touched her cheek, his touch so gentle it was almost reverent. The warmth of his palm sent a cascade of shivers down her spine, waking up parts of her she had long put to sleep. "Can I?" he asked softly, his gaze locked on her lips. His eyes asked for permission, for a sign that this was okay. Her own lips trembled as she gave him her answer. Yes. The kiss was nothing like her past. It wasn't rushed or hungry or rough. It was slow. It was tender. It was so painfully gentle that it felt like it was healing something broken inside her. This was a kiss from a man who wasn't trying to take something from her, a man who didn't want just her body. He wanted her heart. And that, more than anything in her past, terrified her. That night, Olido cried herself to sleep. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, terrifying joy. Something beautiful was growing in a part of her heart she thought was dead and buried. And beauty, she realized, frightened her. She feared Chuka's love more than she had ever feared poverty. She feared being cared for more than she had ever feared loneliness. Why? Because real affection required honesty. And honesty required her to reveal the parts of herself she wished had never existed. Her past, her scars, the nights she spent just surviving, her reputation back in ABA, the men who had touched her without her heart's consent, the shame she buried so deep she could barely feel it anymore. How could a man like Chuka, so good and so pure, ever love her if he found out? How could he look at her the same way, knowing where she came from and what she'd done? But the more she tried to pull back emotionally, the more she tried to build her walls back up, the deeper she fell for him. It was a hopeless fight. She couldn't help it. Chuka's kindness was a slow-burning fire, gradually thawing the ice around her heart. His patience was a gentle tide, melting her fear one grain at a time. His very presence calmed the storms inside her that she couldn't tame on her own. She started to live for the little things. She found herself longing for his good morning messages, for the sound of his voice over the phone, for the easy way his smile reached his eyes. Most of all, she longed for the way he looked at her, like she was someone precious, someone worthy, someone who mattered. It was a feeling she had never, ever known before. 6 months passed. 6 months of this slow, steady, terrifyingly beautiful love. One perfect evening, they were at his house. They had just finished dinner, and the mood was light and comfortable. Then, suddenly, he stood up and turned to face her. Olido froze when she saw his expression. It was a look she had never seen on him before. It was serious, certain, determined. She felt her heartbeat begin to pound in her throat, a frantic drum against the sudden silence. What is it?" she managed to ask. Chuka walked closer until he was standing only inches away, his presence filling her entire world. Olido, he said quietly, his voice steady and sure. I know what I want in my life, and I know who I want. Her breath quickened. Her legs started to tremble. This was it. The moment the dream would end. He was going to say he'd found out. He was going to say goodbye. But then he reached into his pocket. Her entire body went numb. A cold dread washed over her. Chuka, no, please don't. She whispered, tears already burning her eyes, pleading with him not to do what she thought he was about to do. But he didn't stop. With his eyes locked on hers, filled with an emotion she couldn't dare to name, he knelt. Her heart stopped. The world stopped. Time stopped. Olido, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he held out a small, velvet box. I want you to marry me. She broke. A sob tore from her throat as she began to shake violently. Tears she hadn't been able to hold back finally burst from her eyes, streaming down her face. A war raged inside her. She wanted to scream in no. She wanted to tell him he was making a mistake, that she didn't deserve him, that she wasn't the woman he thought she was. She wanted to beg him to stand up and choose someone else. Someone pure, someone clean, someone untouched by the filth of the world she came from. But another part of her, a part that had been starved for a lifetime, screamed yes. Yes, I want to be loved by you. Yes, I want to be yours. Yes, I want this beautiful, impossible dream to be real. All she could do was stand there, shattered and shaking, caught between the past that defined her and the future he was offering her on one knee. She opened her mouth, her voice catching in her throat, thick with unshed tears. Chuka, I'm not a good woman. He wouldn't let her finish. He gently slid the ring onto her trembling finger and whispered, his voice a steady anchor in her storm. I don't care who you think you are. I know who you are to me. She collapsed into his arms, the sobs she'd been holding back finally breaking free, racking her body. They weren't tears of joy. They were tears of pure agony. Because deep down, in the place where she kept her darkest secrets, she knew. One day, her past would come for this man's heart and shatter it into a million pieces. And she had no idea how to stop it. The wedding day arrived with a quiet, almost deceptive calm. But for Olido, it carried the weight of a gathering storm, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Everything around her was the picture of perfection. The grand estate was a vision in soft white and blush pink, flowers lining every walkway like a fragrant promise. The gentle, melodic hum of strings filled the air, a soundtrack to a fairy tale she felt she hadn't earned. Guests began to arrive, their faces bright with smiles, their conversations light and happy, completely oblivious to the hurricane raging silently inside the bride. Olido stood before the full-length mirror, taking one last look at the woman staring back at her before it was time to walk down the aisle. Her gown was a masterpiece of understated elegance, flowing around her like liquid moonlight, highlighting her natural beauty without demanding attention. Her hair was swept up in a soft, romantic style, her makeup light and flawless. To anyone looking, she was the epitome of calm, poised, serene, a perfect bride. But inside, it was pure chaos. The weight of her past felt heavier than ever. Her mind unwillingly drifted back to ABA, to the long, desperate nights of survival, to the secrets she had buried so deep she'd hoped they'd turn to dust, to the men whose names, whose faces, were still faint but persistent whispers in the corners of her memory. She had tried so hard to convince herself that moving to Abuja, starting fresh, had erased that part of her life, that she could just leave it all behind. But standing there, on the very brink of this beautiful new beginning, she was forced to face a brutal truth. Her past hadn't been erased. It had only been buried. And buried things have a way of clawing their way back to the surface. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath that did little to calm her racing heart. She whispered a desperate, silent prayer. God, forgive me for everything. Please, just let him love me. Love me in a way I've never been loved before. Her bridesmaids flitted around her, their presence a soft, comforting buzz. They helped with the final touches, adjusting her veil, smoothing a non-existent crease in her dress. They didn't know. They couldn't possibly guess the thoughts that were haunting her, chasing each other in a frantic circle inside her head. They just smiled their genuine, happy smiles, their laughter and gentle whispers a temporary balm on her frayed nerves. Then, the music began, a soft, lilting melody that seemed to make the very air feel sacred, holy. It was time. Olido took her first step down the long aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she were walking through thick mud, pulling against an invisible force that was trying to drag her back. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of not just joy, but a profound, paralyzing fear. And then she saw him, Chuka, standing at the altar, waiting for her. He looked so handsome, so perfect, in a sharp navy blue suit. His eyes were calm, steady, and fixed entirely on her. As she drew closer, a small, wonderfully reassuring smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Her chest tightened so much she thought she might faint. He didn't know. He didn't know the truth of her past, the ugliness she felt she carried within her. He didn't know how deeply flawed, how broken she believed she was. And yet, he trusted her. He loved her. Completely. An overwhelming urge washed over her. To scream, to turn and run, to confess everything right there and then, to beg him to leave before he found out the truth, and it destroyed him. But she didn't. She kept walking, step by agonizing step, her heart a mess of turmoil, a war between hope and despair. When she finally reached him, he took her hands in his. His palms were warm and strong, a grounding force that pulled her back from the edge of the precipice. "You look perfect," he whispered, his voice full of a sincere awe that made her want to weep. Olido forced a small, fragile smile onto her lips. I hope I am," she managed to reply, the words feeling like a lie. The priest began the ceremony, his voice a calm, steady drone. Olido listened, her mind in a fog, until it was her turn. She recited her vows, the words she had practiced, words that were polished and careful. They were honest, but only in the way she could afford to be. "I promise to love you, to stand by you, to be your partner in all things, in happiness and in sorrow." She had to pause for a moment, her breath catching. In the privacy of her own mind, she finished the vow. "Even though I am broken, even though I am flawed, even though I carry the ghosts of my past with me every single day." But of course, she didn't say that out loud. Chuka's vows, in contrast, were beautifully simple and raw. There was no flowery language, no grand pronouncements. He just looked directly into her eyes, his own shining with an intensity that took her breath away, and said, "I love you, Olido. Not the past, not the secrets, not the world, just you." His words didn't just touch her, they carved themselves into her heart. Deep, permanent. Tears, hot and real, began to roll down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him so badly. She needed to believe him. It was the only thing that could save her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The priest's words echoed in the suddenly silent hall. Chuka lifted her veil, his movements slow and deliberate. For a long moment, their eyes met, a silent conversation passing between them. And then, their lips touched. It wasn't like any kiss she had known before. It wasn't hurried or hungry. It wasn't a transaction, a means to an end, a touch born of survival like the ones from her past. This kiss was slow and soft, and so full of promise it made her soul ache. It was a promise she was terrified she didn't deserve, yet it was a promise she needed more than her next breath. The reception was a dizzying whirl of vibrant colors, infectious laughter, and joyful music. Friends and family clinked glasses and toasts, filled the dance floor, and celebrated the union of two people they believed were destined for happiness. But Olido moved through it all like a ghost at her own wedding. She was there, but not really. To the world, she was the happiest woman alive. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She laughed at jokes she barely heard. She posed for countless photos, her arm linked through her new husband's. Finally, the guests left. The mansion grew quiet. Only the soft hum of the evening breeze and the distant chirping of crickets filled the air. Olido and Chuka sat together in the living room, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked. It was a new beginning, a fragile one, a dangerous one, because love, she realized, was not a shield against her past. It was the light that illuminated every dark corner of it. She whispered, resting her head on his shoulder, "I hope I can be enough for you." Chuka kissed her forehead. "You are more than enough. You already are." And in that quiet room, the woman who had survived the streets of ABA, who had survived herself, let herself believe just for a moment, that she could belong, that she could be loved, that she could start over. The first weeks of married life felt surreal. Olito woke each morning to the calm, orderly world of Chuka's mansion. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, reflecting softly off the polished floors. Breakfast was served on fine china, with hot coffee and fresh pastries waiting for her at the table. It was a life she had only ever dreamed of. It should have been perfect. And yet, there was a silence that began to grow, a silence that felt heavier than any noise she had ever known. Chuka's work consumed him. He was a man of immense ambition, a trait she had always admired. But that ambition meant early mornings at the office, late evenings tied up in meetings, and frequent trips to visit investors and properties. His days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork, a world she wasn't a part of. Olito understood. She had seen his drive from the start, respected his discipline. She told herself to be patient, that this was the price of the life they were building. But understanding didn't ease the hunger that began to stir inside her. This wasn't a hunger for money, not for the luxury that surrounded her, and not even for attention. It was the old craving, the one that had never fully left her. The craving for touch, for warmth, for the kind of closeness and affirmation that told her she was real, that she was wanted. She had survived ABA with her body intact, but here, in the deafening quiet of this magnificent mansion, her heart and her body longed for a love that Chuka's absence couldn't provide fast enough. She was experiencing loneliness in paradise. In the early mornings, after Chuka had left, she would wander through the mansion, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold surfaces of the furniture, the walls, the polished floors, as if hoping to draw some connection, some warmth, from the house itself. But the house remained an empty shell without him. Her only true sanctuary became the stables. The horses, with their familiar strength and quiet warmth, were a comfort. They allowed her to remember what it felt like to be needed, to be wanted, even if it was just by creatures of the earth. But a horse is not a husband. And no matter how soothing their presence was, it didn't quiet the deep, persistent ache inside her. She tried everything to distract herself. She tried reading the countless books that lined the library shelves. She tried socializing with the neighbors, their polite conversations feeling hollow and distant. She tried to bury herself in hobbies and chores, attempting to fill the long, empty hours. But nothing could stop the insistent pulse of desire that had been a part of her identity for so long. It was a fire she had learned to control in ABA, a tool she had wielded for survival. But here, in a life of safety and comfort, she found she couldn't extinguish it. The first night she felt truly alone was a turning point. One evening, Chuka was scheduled to return from a late meeting. Hopeful, Olito had prepared a small, intimate dinner, imagining they might finally have a quiet moment together. But when he arrived, he barely paused. He was exhausted, his mind still on work. He ate quickly, spoke briefly about his day, and then disappeared into his home office, the click of the door sealing her out. Olito sat alone at the grand dining table, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth, the food suddenly tasteless. An emptiness she hadn't felt in years washed over her, cold and vast. Her thoughts, unbidden, drifted back to ABA. She remembered the nights when men had been at her mercy, their desire a currency she could spend. She remembered the intoxicating power she had wielded through that desire. She shivered at the memory, a dangerous and thrilling ghost from her past. She didn't want to be that woman again. She desperately wanted to be this new version of herself, a wife who loved and was loved in return. But her body seemed to have a mind of its own. It whispered for touch. It demanded intimacy. It reminded her of all the nights where restraint was a luxury she couldn't afford, where survival depended on answering the body's call. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Chuka remained busy, lost in his world of ambition. She remained patient, a smiling wife waiting in a silent mansion. But the fire inside her was growing, becoming insatiable. The quiet ache was transforming into a desperate, roaring flame. At times, she found herself at the stables long after Chuka had gone to bed. She would ride the horses into the night, the powerful rhythm of the ride easing her tension temporarily, but never fully satisfying the deeper need. At night, she lay awake in their vast, empty bed, tracing the contours of the mattress where he should have been, imagining the touch she longed for. The scent of him on the pillows was a faint, painful reminder of his distance. And slowly, almost without her realizing it, that desire began to morph into a quiet obsession. It became a secret need she tried to bury deep within herself, a temptation she swore she would never give in to. She was Chuka's wife. She was better than this. But the more she denied it, the more it grew. The more she pushed it down, the more powerful it became, threatening to consume the fragile new life she was trying so hard to build. The thirst inside her was becoming unbearable, and she was beginning to fear where it might lead her. She loved Chuka. Truly, she did. Deeper than she had ever loved anyone. But love and desire are not always the same thing. Her body, trained by years of survival, was impatient. Her heart, softened by his gentleness, was desperate. She began to fear the consequences of that longing. What if it led her to make a mistake? What if it pushed her towards something she could never take back? What if she broke the man who trusted her most? And yet, that primal hunger, the thirst inside her, refused to be ignored. She would lie awake in the darkness, staring up at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "I can't. I won't. But I need. I need. I need." The night would stretch on, seemingly endless. Her body screamed in ways her heart couldn't silence. Her mind spun with memories and fantasies she never wanted to confront. She was trapped between love and lust, between loyalty and hunger, between the past she could not erase and the present she could not fully embrace. And in that tension, in that quiet, trembling, aching night, she understood one terrifying truth. Her body had not forgotten ABA, and it would not forgive the quiet, peaceful life she now craved. Weeks had passed since the wedding. Chuka, ever the dutiful husband and businessman, was busier than ever. Meetings dominated his mornings, calls consumed his afternoons, and late-night reports often stretched into the early hours of the next day. Olido tried to adapt. She genuinely tried to bury the old cravings, the restlessness, the insatiable hunger that had once defined her entire being, her very body. But some fires, once lit, refused to be extinguished. They simply smolder, waiting for a breath of air to roar back to life. And then came the night that everything broke. It was a quiet evening, unremarkable at first glance. Chuka had returned home even later than usual, the exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. He mumbled a greeting and went straight to his office to finish his work. He barely spoke to her. Olido sat alone in the sprawling living room, staring out the large window at the manicured grounds of the estate. The silence, which once felt peaceful, now pressed on her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She tried to distract herself. She picked up a book, but the words swam before her eyes. She scrolled mindlessly through her phone, but the endless stream of content felt hollow and meaningless. She even tried cleaning the already spotless kitchen, hoping the physical activity would quiet her mind. But nothing worked. The ache inside her, a familiar and unwelcome guest, grew sharper with each passing minute. Her body, a treacherous archive of memories, began to play back the nights with ABA. The raw hunger, the uninhibited touch, the primal craving she had once fed without a hint of shame or hesitation. And now, even though she loved Chuka with a sincerity that surprised even herself, that old hunger demanded release. It was a serpent, coiling in her gut, whispering to her, coaxing her, begging her. "You are made for this," it hissed. "You need it. You cannot hold back." Her hands began to tremble. Her breath quickened, coming in short, shallow gasps. She closed her eyes, and an image flashed in her mind. The horses in Chuka's stable. Strong, warm, alive. A dangerous, forbidden thought crept into her mind, seductive in its simplicity. Just one moment. One touch. One mistake. She told herself it was harmless, a private way to end the torment, a secret no one would ever know. And that was the precise moment her life, the new life she had fought so hard to build, tipped over the edge. She moved with a ghostly silence through the grand mansion, her bare feet making no sound on the cool marble floors. She slipped out a side door and headed toward the stable. The night air was cool against her skin, and the bright moonlight painted silver stripes on the ground, guiding her way. Inside, Chuka's horses stood quietly in their stalls, their gentle breathing the only sound in the stillness. She approached the one that had always drawn her attention, the magnificent brown stallion, a creature of immense strength and steady calm. Its large, dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw not an animal, but a calm and intelligent being. She whispered, the words barely audible, almost to herself, a confession to the night. I need you. And then, as she touched him, the warmth of his coat, the sheer power rippling in the muscles beneath her hands, it sent a jolt, a thrill through her body that she hadn't felt in years. It was a feeling she had tried so desperately to forget, a feeling she had locked away. She tried to stop. She really did. A voice in her head screamed, You love Chuka? You love him. She told herself she would never betray him, not like this, not ever. But the fire inside her had grown too large. It was a relentless inferno now, consuming all reason, all loyalty. The hunger she had tried to deny for months became unbearable, a physical pain demanding to be soothed. There, in the quiet of the stable, alone with the scent of hay and horse, the boundaries she had so carefully constructed for herself crumbled into dust. And in a moment she knew she could never, ever take back, she gave in. When she finally returned to the mansion, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky. Her hands were still trembling, her body thrumming with the aftershock of the forbidden act. She walked past Chuka's office. The light was still on. He was still buried in his work, completely oblivious to the cataclysm that had just shattered their lives. She wanted to tell him. A part of her, the part that loved him, screamed to confess, to throw herself at his feet and beg for a forgiveness she did not deserve. But how? How could she possibly explain that she had betrayed him? Not with another man, which would have been understandable, perhaps even forgivable in its own terrible way, but with something far stranger, something impossible, something that defied all logic and decency. She couldn't. The words wouldn't form. So she didn't speak. She didn't move. She only walked numbly to their bedroom and sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as silent tears began to stream down her face, soaking into the pillow. God, forgive me, she whispered into the empty room. Please, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Her mind was a raging storm of shame, fear, and a strange, hollow disbelief at what she had just done. It was a betrayal so profound, she wasn't sure if even God could forgive it. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would never, ever be able to forgive herself. The days trickled by, each one a mask she wore with practiced ease. She presented Chuka with the face he knew, the wife he loved. She smiled when he walked into a room. She cooked his favorite meals, the aromas filling the halls of their home. She laughed at his jokes, the sound echoing a joy she no longer felt inside. But beneath the surface, a dark tide was rising. A secret, heavy and impossible, lodged itself in her chest, a physical weight she carried everywhere. She lived in constant fear that it would erupt from her, a volcanic confession that would incinerate her world, destroying the man she adored and the life they had built. And yet, alongside the terror, a strange and horrifying knowledge took root. Something impossible had begun inside her. She could feel it, a subtle shift in her own body, an undeniable alteration that defied all logic. A foreign presence was growing within her, something unnatural, something monstrous. The thought alone was enough to make her dizzy with fear. No, she would whisper to herself in the dead of night. This can't be happening. It's impossible. How? What have I done? Her nights became a frantic dance of despair. She paced the length of her bedroom, sleep and food becoming distant memories. She sank to her knees, praying to a God she felt had abandoned her. She wept until her eyes were raw, begging for forgiveness, for a miracle, for any cosmic intervention that could rewind time and undo the single, silent act that had shattered her life. And all the while, the impossible thing inside her continued to grow. Something that would defy belief, something that would shock the entire world. It was a secret that would test the very limits of love, of forgiveness, and of what it means to be human. Something was waiting to be born. The months crawled by, each day an unbearable eternity. Olito's body warped and changed in ways that left her feeling like a stranger to herself. Her stomach grew round, a constant, visible reminder of her secret. Her limbs ached with a strange, deep-seated pain, and her nights were fraught with restless, phantom energy. When she finally told Chuka she was pregnant, his reaction was pure, unadulterated joy. A brilliant smile lit up his face as he swept her into his arms, holding her close, whispering words of hope and excitement against her hair. "Our child," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't wait to meet our baby." Olito forced a smile, the effort making her jaw ache. She kissed him, a tender, loving gesture that hid the icy talons of terror clawing at her insides. How could she tell him? How could she confess the impossible truth she carried in her womb? This child, it wasn't entirely his. The pregnancy was a trial by fire. Doctors were perplexed. They noted the unusual changes in her body, the strange readings on their machines, but their theories were useless. Nothing they said made sense in the world of modern science, not for the world she knew. Olito's sleep was a landscape of bizarre, vivid dreams. She dreamt of running through endless, sun-drenched fields, feeling powerful, unfamiliar legs moving beneath her. She felt a thundering heartbeat in her chest that was not her own, a primal rhythm that echoed the wild. Her body ached, not with the typical discomforts of pregnancy, but with something deeper, more elemental, something foreign, something untamed. Many nights, she would cry silently in the dark, her hands pressed against her swollen stomach as if to contain the impossible life within. "God, what have I done?" She would sob into her pillow. "Please forgive me." Then, the night came. It arrived with a fury, as if nature itself was heralding the event. A violent storm broke over the mansion. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howled like a grieving animal, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and electricity. Chuka was her rock. He stayed by her side, his hand a warm, steady presence in hers, his voice a constant stream of love and encouragement. "You're so strong," he whispered. "Our baby is strong. I'm right here with you." Olito wanted to scream. The truth was a physical thing, a jagged stone caught in her throat. She wanted to confess everything, to purge the poison from her soul, but the words wouldn't come. The hours bled into one another. Pain crashed over her in relentless waves. Sweat drenched her skin, and her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. And then, the impossible happened. As the baby finally emerged into the world, a collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The doctors stared, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. The nurses froze, their training failing them in the face of this reality. Chuka's eyes widened, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Before them, lying in the harsh light of the delivery room, was a child unlike any the world had ever seen. A centaur, a creature of myth and legend, made flesh. The top half of the child was perfectly, beautifully human. A delicate, soft torso, tiny arms, and a face that looked up at them with wide, intelligent eyes. But its lower half was that of a horse. For strong, brown legs, like the magnificent horses Chuka kept in his stables, trembled with the shock of new life. An absolute, deafening silence fell over the room. Chuka's hand trembled as he reached out, not toward the child, but toward Olito. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a barely audible whisper, shaking with a cocktail of shock and horror. What happened? That was the breaking point. The dam of her secrets burst. Sobs tore from Olito's throat, raw and agonizing. She could no longer hide. "Chuka, please," she cried, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame and grief. "I couldn't control myself. One of your horses, it got me pregnant." She collapsed, her strength gone, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, please forgive me. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I love you so much, please." Chuka just stared, horror and utter disbelief carved into every line of his face. His hands trembled as his gaze flickered between the mythical child and the weeping woman he thought he knew. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy with shock, grief, and a confusion so profound it seemed to bend the very air around them. What happens now? What happens when the impossible is born? If you want to see how this unbelievable story unfolds, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Olito wept openly, her body shaking with grief and shame. Chuka's mind raced. He wanted to scream, to cry, to strike something, but nothing would form in his throat. How is this possible?" he whispered, almost to himself. "I don't know," Olito sobbed. "It just happened. I couldn't resist. I didn't mean to. I love you." The centaur child looked at them with wide, innocent eyes. There was no malice in its gaze, only life, pure, bewildering, impossible life. And in that moment, Olido realized the magnitude of what she had done. She had survived so much, survived the judgment of the world, survived her own past. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for this. For the impossible. For a child that was both a miracle and a curse. For a life that could shatter love, reshape reality, and test forgiveness in ways no human heart had ever imagined. Chuka finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. Olido, I need to understand. But we will figure this out. We are still a family somehow. I don't know how, but we will. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. Thank you, thank you. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. The rain continued outside, pounding against the mansion as if the heavens themselves both mourned and marveled at what had just happened. The impossible had occurred, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same. A new chapter had begun, one of love, guilt, wonder, and the uncharted path of raising a child that belonged to both the human world and something wild, untamed, and mythical. The days after the birth were a blur of disbelief, fear, and wonder. Chuka couldn't bring himself to leave the hospital room. Olido stayed close, exhausted but vigilant, terrified of what the world would say if they knew. She hadn't left Chuka's side for more than a few minutes since the birth. The atmosphere in the hospital was thick with tension. The nurses avoided direct eye contact. Doctors whispered to one another in corners, debating whether this was a matter of science, a miracle, or something else entirely. The situation was unprecedented, a medical anomaly that defied every textbook. They ran tests, took samples, and held hushed conferences, but no explanation could contain the reality before them. Yet in the midst of all this panic and confusion, a small, undeniable truth began to settle in both of their hearts. This child was alive. This child was theirs. And somehow, they would survive this together. After what felt like an eternity, the hospital allowed them to leave. Returning to their grand mansion, the estate felt larger and more imposing than ever before. Every hallway, every shadow, every silent room now carried the weight of their impossible secret. They moved cautiously, their every action focused on ensuring the child was safe. They began the daunting task of adjusting their home, their lives, to accommodate a creature who was part human, part horse. Beds, stables, rooms, everything had to be reconsidered. One afternoon, Olido watched Chuka as he gently lifted the child. He spoke softly, his voice a low murmur, as if he were trying to coax understanding from a being that already seemed to grasp more than any human toddler. "You are ours," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll protect you, no matter what." Olido's heart both swelled and cracked at the same time. She had never seen him so tender, so completely devoted. She had never felt such love, a love not broken by betrayal, not dulled by anger, but somehow strengthened by the sheer impossibility of their situation. And for the first time since the birth, she dared to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this. Life, however, was not gentle. The challenges of their new reality were immense. Feeding the Centaur child required careful planning. Human food for the upper body, special fodder for the lower half. The child needed space to run, to stretch its powerful limbs. And it possessed a strength that was growing faster than they could have anticipated, requiring a firm but gentle hand to manage. Their carefully constructed privacy began to fray at the edges. Neighbors started to notice odd sounds coming from the estate, the thundering of hooves in the stables at night, strange echoes that carried across the yard. Whispers began to circulate. Questions were asked. Some wondered if Chuka, with his wealth, had acquired exotic animals for a private zoo. The speculation grew, and with it, the risk of their secret being exposed. Olido remained vigilant, becoming a master of deflection and misdirection. She tried to explain things away as if their life were completely normal, as if the impossible were just another part of the ordinary. "He's a special child," she said one evening to a friend who had come to visit, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Not like any of us, but full of life and love." The words felt hollow, even to her. The truth was a burden heavier than anyone could ever understand. Through it all, Chuka became her anchor. Despite his initial shock and the immense personal pain he must have felt, he never wavered. He worked long hours, maintaining their livelihood, but he always returned home. He always spent time with the child, and he never, not once, let Olido feel alone in her fear and guilt. He would take the child to the stables, riding alongside him, speaking softly, showing a patience and care that was breathtaking to witness. He laughed when the little centaur stumbled on his unsteady legs, when he tried to run too fast and tumbled into the hay. And slowly, watching him, Olido felt the suffocating burden of her shame begin to ease, though she knew it would never fully disappear. His forgiveness wasn't just spoken, it was lived every single day. He taught the child to be gentle, to control his growing strength. He brushed his coat, mended scrapes on his knees, and told him stories of a world that might one day accept him. In these moments, Olido saw not just a husband, but a true father, a man whose capacity for love was greater than any betrayal. He had chosen his family, chosen this impossible life, and in his choice, he was giving her the strength to do the same. The world outside their gates remained a threat, a constant source of anxiety. But within the walls of their home, a strange and beautiful new normal began to take shape. It was a life built on a secret, forged in crisis, but held together by a love that refused to be broken. Their journey was just beginning, and the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger. But as long as they had each other, and the impossible child that was the center of their world, they had a chance. For the first time in her life, she realized that love could survive the impossible, that it could grow even in the shadow of betrayal, fear, and the supernatural. As days turned into weeks, the child learned quickly. It mimicked human speech, but also galloped with the speed of its equine half. It could climb small obstacles, nuzzle Chuka's cheek with surprising gentleness, and respond to Olido's whispered words as if it understood the depths of her soul. Neighbors began to whisper. Some thought it was a rare, exotic breed of horse. Others suspected something far stranger. But Chuka's reputation and his wealth shielded them from any direct judgment. Yet the parents knew the truth. Their child was neither fully human nor fully horse. It was a bridge between worlds, fragile, wondrous, and at times, terrifying. And Olido, despite every instinct screaming fear, found herself laughing and crying in equal measure, absolutely amazed at the life she had helped create. One quiet evening, Olido sat on the balcony. The centaur child galloped freely in the yard below, and Chuka stood beside her, their hands intertwined. She realized something profound. This was not the life she had known before, a life defined by survival or shame. This was love, unbroken, unstoppable, and capable of miracles. Her past had shaped her. Her mistakes had haunted her. But together, they had created something stronger than any fear. The centaur child wasn't just a challenge to overcome. It was a testament to their survival, to their love, to forgiveness, and to the impossible becoming reality. Olido leaned into Chuka, whispering softly, "We'll survive this. Somehow together." Chuka pressed his forehead to hers, a warm smile spreading across his face. Always together. Always. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, stars blinking in quiet approval. And for the first time, Olido truly believed that even the impossible could be loved, nurtured, and raised. The news spread slowly at first. Neighbors whispered. The estate staff gossiped. Even distant friends sensed something unusual was happening. But when outsiders finally glimpsed the centaur child, half human, half horse, alive and moving with impossible grace, the world's reaction was explosive. Journalists, scientists, and the endlessly curious swarmed the estate. Social media erupted with speculation, fierce debates about morality, science, and the very boundaries of reality. Through it all, Chuka remained calm. He was a man built like a mountain, tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet presence that commanded attention. His deep brown eyes, both warm and piercing, carried a gentle authority. His skin was smooth, sun-kissed from years spent outdoors, riding his horses and managing his vast estates. His hair was thick, black, and always neatly trimmed. But what made Chuka so extraordinary wasn't just his appearance. It was the way he moved, deliberate, grounded, and fiercely protective. It was the way he spoke, soft, yet with unshakable confidence. Most of all, it was the way he looked at Olido, as if she was the only person who had ever mattered, regardless of the impossible truth they now faced. Despite the chaos raging outside their gates, he created a private world for their family, a bubble of love, trust, and complete understanding. But amidst this new reality, old feelings resurfaced. Olito's desires, the hunger that had once defined her, didn't simply disappear with marriage or motherhood. She still longed for touch, for attention, for the fiery passion of her husband. And Chuka noticed. He always noticed. But instead of chastising or ignoring her, he approached her needs with incredible thoughtfulness. First, he encouraged communication. He asked her to speak openly about her desires and her fears, creating a space where she felt completely safe to express herself. Then, they rebuilt their intimacy gradually. They started slowly, not with passion alone, but with tender touches, soft kisses, and gentle caresses that re-established trust and closeness. Even with his demanding schedule, he carved out private hours for them, mornings before work, quiet evenings after dinner, where they could reconnect physically and emotionally. Chuka took the time to understand her body. He learned what brought her pleasure, what made her laugh, what eased her tension. He never rushed, never demanded, and never, ever compared her to anyone else. Beyond just the physical, he brought playfulness and humor back into their intimacy, making her feel alive and wanted rather than guilty or ashamed. He understood that intimacy was a two-way street, ensuring they shared moments that left them both fulfilled emotionally and physically. Over time, Olito's old hunger, that restless, primal craving, began to transform. She no longer felt trapped by it. Instead, she felt connected, cherished, and deeply understood. She was experiencing a kind of fulfillment that went far beyond mere physicality. Together, they discovered that desire wasn't just about satisfaction. It was about attention, care, and emotional connection. Chuka's patience and attentiveness made Olito feel safe to explore her needs without any shame. Their nights became rituals of trust, warmth, and gentle exploration. It wasn't hurried or reckless. It was intentional, filled with laughter, deep passion, and mutual respect. And in the warm glow of these moments, Olito realized something profound. The hunger she once feared was not a curse. It was a bridge that had brought her closer to the man who loved her completely for everything she was. As the world outside struggled to make sense of the Centaur child, a different kind of understanding was blossoming within the walls of Olito and Chuka's home. They realized that they couldn't control the narrative entirely, but they could guide it. With immense care, they began to educate journalists, sharing just enough of their reality, blending the unbelievable truth with a necessary layer of discretion. Their days settled into a new rhythm, a routine designed for their child's unique needs. They created safe spaces for him to run, to stretch his powerful legs, and to grow strong, far from the prying eyes and whispers of the world. The estate became more than just a home. It was a sanctuary, a fortress against gossip and fear. Within its grounds, they showered their child with lessons of love, kindness, and unwavering confidence, teaching him to be proud of who he was. Through all of this, Olito discovered a profound shift within herself. She had always known Chuka's love in a physical sense, a passionate connection that had once been her escape. But now, it was something more. It was an anchor in the storm of public opinion. It was a calm that soothed the restless parts of her soul. His love gave her the strength to look at her own past, at the choices that once felt impossible or shameful, and finally, to forgive herself. The world could react with all its fear, its morbid curiosity, and its disbelief. It didn't matter as much anymore. Olito no longer felt the desperate need to run, to escape. She had a partner who saw past shame, who knew how to nurture desire with responsibility, and who was willing to stand with her and face the impossible head-on. Together, they were doing more than just surviving. They were rising. They were building a family that the world might never truly understand, but one that was forged in a love so strong, no outside force could ever hope to break it. They were thriving. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends and kindly subscribe for more amazing stories.